Another reason that the technology isn't necessarily going to dig our way out of it is that in developed societies like ours, all we see is the end product of technology. Okay, we have a photovoltaic panel, we have a turbine, we have a computer. Okay, in general, thanks to a whole bunch of political shenanigans the last 20 years in the U.S., all the manufacturing plants that produce this technology have largely gone offshore to places where they still have cheap energy and cheap labor. So in general, this is how our photovoltaic panels are produced. There's not a photovoltaic manufacturing plant in the entire world that operates off sunlight. There's not a wind turbine plant in the entire world that runs off wind. There's not a battery manufacturing plant in the entire world that runs off stored energy from alternative power. This is how they do it. Somebody, somewhere, burns something to provide us with power and technology and gadgets and food. And actually, that's the way the world has always been, right? We're combustion junkies, right? What we get is the end result of this. So it's a bit of a facade, right? We only see the end result of the combustion. We externalize the impacts of our consumption. That is where we are as a developed society, right? I just want a nice, clean, quiet PV panel on my house, right? I don't want a coal burning plant in my backyard. I want somebody else to do that work for me. I just want the end result nice and clean, okay? So this is where we're at, right? We externalize the impacts of our demand and consumption. And this is what it leads to. Because economics shows that if you demand something, somebody will produce it. And this is how they'll produce it. The next issue we're going to look at, and then we're going to tie all these together, is tropical agriculture. This is how most of our food comes from. Most of our food comes from wheat, rice, in food I mean, calories that keep us alive every day, right? Comes from wheat, rice, and corn. All industrialized, mechanized agriculture, and all oil-based. Essentially, it's been demonstrated many times. Essentially, what we do in agriculture in today's society is turn oil into carbohydrates. That's pretty much what we do. And so even though agriculture is highly effective, we produce an overabundance of calories for consumption. That overabundance, the ability to grossly feed the world, even though we don't distribute it evenly, right? It is a result of cheap, abundant liquid fuels. Ooh, you just heard that that's a problem. This graph shows inflation-adjusted oil price in the bottom versus, I think it's barrels or bushels of barley. And you access a whole bunch of agricultural databases that plot this same type of data for different crops. And what it shows is that as fuel is cheap to a farmer, all right, they can produce the same amount of bushels of wheat when oil is cheap. But as fuel becomes higher and higher, there's very little wiggle room in the ability of agriculture to produce food. Okay, and I put this up there because that contrasts the rest of our lives. All right, we are just profligate users of energy, and most of us could do without 80% of the consumption of our energy. Really, I mean, go anywhere in rural Europe, they live pretty cool, satisfying lives with a fraction of the energy consumption of Americans. Farmers worldwide are not in that boat. They are very prudent, they are very economical people, and there's very little wiggle room. So when we go back to and look at the issue of tightening and eventually very, very difficult access to fuels to produce food, surplus food worldwide, they're going to be hit first. They have no wiggle room like you and I do. They run a very, very tight ship. This issue, and so we're going to look at a tightening and a difficulty of achieving surplus food production worldwide. This is particularly an issue for the tropics, and in particular tropical islands, Hawaii. Even though the Garden Island where I live, Hawaii is a use that term, it's a garden island. Most people don't know that arguably the older Hawaiian Islands have some of the poorest agricultural soils in the entire world. And one of the best, most succinct descriptions of why this is so is in Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. And there he talks about the evolution of soils, how soils are created and maintained in different environments around the world. And because we sit out in the middle of the Pacific, we lack almost all those soil building activities, okay? And so farmers and agronomists are not, they're very, very smart. They're good at what they do. And so over the years, we identified some of the few crops that actually grow here, sugarcane, pineapple, and soils that have pHs of 4, 4.1, 3.8. I mean, those are highly acidic soils. So in general, Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders figure out very, very specific ways of producing surplus food resources. So historically in Hawaii, almost all agriculture was in riparian riverine valleys like the Chautauqua Lake, where all the nutrients are washed down, deposited in these floodplains. With the exception of 3 places in Hawaii, the Kona and Kohala field systems and Kahiki Nui on Maui, archaeology shows that there was no evidence, there is no evidence of sustained upland agriculture anywhere in Hawaii. The soils just don't support that, right? It's only with this massive input of fertilizer and oil-powered machinery that we can sustain what we call sustainable agriculture in these soils. It just doesn't work that way. And by sustainable, I mean over centuries. That's the mindset that we have to be looking at it. So we begin to have, we need to have to start looking at historically, how did people that actually sustain themselves over millennia in these different environments, how did they do it, right? Because we've been cheating, right? So to speak, we've been cheating. So how did they do it? What kind of technology did they use? And where did they conduct their activities? That's the issue we're facing worldwide, and specifically here in Hawaii. So we know we're facing an energy crisis. We know that that's going to lead to increased atmospheric carbon loading with all those watershed effects for the rest of the society. And we know we're going to have an increasingly difficult time in food production, particularly in the tropics, because our depleted soils here are common throughout the world in the tropics. Okay? And we know that in order to continue to sustain the lifestyles we demand, we burn things. Okay? We're combustion junkies. That's just what we do. So what we're after, and I should stop here in a second and thank my supervisors at the University of Hawaii and Sea Grant, and both Ken Kaneshiro in the Center for Conservation Research and Training in supporting me and my inquiry into these efforts, okay? Because as I'll show you, it's a little bit different way of thinking. And that is that what we're really looking for is a better burn, okay? That's kind of the concept I've put on this, because we burn things. You may not see it, but all this, the air conditioning, the lights, computers, your pen, these are all results of somebody somewhere burning something. True, that's the truth, okay? And usually when we ask somebody else to do it, they're going to do it in the cheapest way that provides the most money for somebody. And usually that means they're not going to do it in the most environmentally and humanly sensitive way, okay? So really what we want to do is reassume our kuleana, right? If you want something that requires burning, by God, you do it yourself. Burn something. Because if you got to do it in your backyard or somewhere close, you're probably going to do it the right way or a better way. Okay, so that's what we're after. If you want these things, you know how to achieve them, but you got to burn something. So how are we going to burn it? So we're after a better burn. We got to burn something that we have. We have no oil. We have no coal. It's hard to even grow crops that you could burn. We can't grow corn here. We're very limited. The one thing that grows really, really well is if you walk away from your backyard for a week. You don't get grass in Hawaii. Oh, we get some grass. You get trees, okay? And I can explain, there's reasons why trees do well where other crops and other things don't, okay? Woody biomass grows really well in Hawaii, just like it does in the Amazon. You walk away from a place in the Amazon for 10 years, you have a jungle again, right? That's how people sustain themselves. So we have stuff to burn here. We have weeds. In one sense, we're kind of lucky because, not in that, the tragedy of the loss of Hawaii's native ecosystem is that, and our recent reliance on oil, is that we haven't had to touch these resources. And when we look around, these islands have become a Garden of Eden again, but covered with weeds like Albizia. And we use Albizia kind of as a real identified fuel source and also as a bit of a metaphor. It is now one of the worst weeds we have as a tree. It's very invasive. It has like wind-floated seeds that land up in our native forest. It's one of the few things that will invade a native forest. But it's also a nitrogen fixer, right? Pardon? Levick? Similar. It's in that group. There's a whole bunch of nitrogen fixing things. In general. Yeah, just in general. It grows very, very fast. You can cut it at about 4 years old and it will regrow. So you're not actually removing like the way sugarcane was harvested to actually rip up the ground. There's a whole bunch of ways that we could begin sensibly examining these new forests that we have in Hawaii as a fuel source. Okay, but again, it's going to require a change in our mindset, right? Because for us, it's like, oh, we like the greenery, we like the new forests we have in Hawaii, and I just want a photovoltaic panel, right? But when you choose that clean energy, remember that clean energy is not clean. You receive it and use it as clean. But somebody else, somewhere, burns something far worse than that Albizia. Far worse. Because burning that Albizia is at least carbon neutral, all right? You will only be re-releasing into the atmosphere the carbon that tree sucked down as part of the cycle. I guarantee you, the production of this computer added to the atmospheric carbon load. They burn buried carbon. Okay? So one of the benefits of choosing this is that you get to do it in my backyard. So I'm going to have an input on how you burn that, right? I'm going to be watching you, and we're collectively as a community, we're going to make sure we figure out the best way to burn this. Don't leave it to somebody else, right?